In this video, we will look at some basic 3D design using Onshape, an online CAD tool. Our example will center around making a custom 3D printed project enclosure. For example, suppose you make a PCB with mounting holes in the corners as well as a power jack on the side. Chances are, you will not find a box to enclose this exact design in a store. You could buy one and carve holes into it yourself, which is a hassle, or you could design something custom and 3D print it. First, when you go to onshape.com, you will be asked to create an account in order to store your projects, and once you do, you will have some kind of an interface that may look like this, and I have a lot of projects over here that I've already created myself, but to make a new one, we're going to go up here to create, and let's call this tutorial, and hit OK to start our project. And here we go. This is what you see when you first start things off. And there's a lot of things going on here. You have this over here. You've got this in the top right corner. You've got all of your actions and various things in the left, and a lot of different icons along the top, as well as even more things going on here. And the first thing that I like to do is I like to go over here actually and change the workspace units to be in millimeters. That's just a personal preference, and we'll go with that. And so everything in Onshape is basically going to be based on making sketches and then performing actions on those sketches. So the sketches are going to help you dimension things and make things look appropriately, and then you can, for example, extrude them, which is going to be our most commonly used action, which is over here, in order to make it 3D or to punch out holes and things like that. Or you can do a lot of other things, and there's, like I said, there are a lot of different options. I'm not going to go through nearly all of them. I'm just going to show you the basics in order to get you started. So the first thing, like I said, that we want to do is we want to make a sketch. And so since we're going to be making a project enclosure, I'm going to make it on this top plane over here. And what I'm going to do, and so first of all, if I click on this top right corner on this box, it'll take me to the various planes that I can view directly. So I'll click on the top and it'll center my view over here because that's what I want. And so the first thing you want to do is draw an arbitrary rectangle. So I click on this rectangle tool up here. You can also click down and you'll see there are options like making it a center point rectangle, which will start it from a center point, or a corner rectangle starting from a corner. I'll make it a corner rectangle, so then I'll click, left click, drag this down, and click again, and it makes a rectangle. Now it has these particular dimensions which I can change later on as well. Let's say for this particular video I want to make this 40 by 50 millimeters. So what I'll do here is click on this dimension tool, and I'll click on this and I can drag it out, and right now it's 42. Let's make it 40. I just type that in and it changes it. I click this and drag it up here, and let's make this 50. So here we go. Here is our initial rectangle, and that's going to be it for this sketch. So I'm going to hit the check sign here, and it's done. Notice this is just a sketch. I can rotate things, by the way, using various means. One of them that I use often is to hold down the right mouse button and then drag the mouse, and you can see I can rotate things around by doing that. And so you can see that this is just a flat thing on this plane. It's not a 3D object by any means. So what I'll want to do is I'll want to extrude it in order to make it a 3D object. So then I'll go to my extrude tool, and it's asking me what faces or sketch regions do you want to extrude. And so I'm going to click on this sketch, and it's going to pop this up, and it says that it wants to make it 25 millimeters high. Just to show you what I can do, I'll make it 20 millimeters, and there is a lot more that I can do here, by the way. Like I said, there are a lot of different options for everything, but I'm just showing you the basics. Then I'll hit the check mark, and now I have a 3D object. I have this block. So this is actually already something I can 3D print. Right now it'll just be a big block. But remember, I want to make this an enclosure. So what I'll do next is actually make another sketch on top of this, and let's make it a center point rectangle. And now Onshape, by the way, I can move around like this by holding down the center mouse button and dragging around. Onshape will be nice in that it'll show you various snap points which you can use to guide your drawing. So for example, if I drag along here, I find the center point. It'll tell you right here, you see it changes the icon. It tells you is the center point, and I can sort of drag that down and it'll keep track of where that center point is, because I want to start my next rectangle at the very center of this box. But I don't know where the other center point is. And actually if I go here and find that center point and drag along that, now that I've already kind of tagged both of them, it'll meet me in the middle, and here it is. And so now I know that it snaps to the center point, and now I can drag this out, and I want to make it so that I have 1 mm walls on my box. Now I know the outer one is 40 by 50, and therefore I go back to my dimension tool, and I know that I can make this be then 48 by 38 in order to make myself have 1 mm walls on the outside. So then I'll say check on that again, and I'll use my extrude tool and extrude this face, but this time the default is to make it go up. But what I want to do, instead of adding, I want to remove this. So I say remove, but I don't want to remove 25 millimeters down. Remember, I extruded 25 millimeters up, 20 millimeters up. If I want to have 1 mm walls, I'll make this 19 going down. And now I have this box with 1 mm walls in all directions. Now, the next step that I want to take is to have some pillars in the corners in order to be able to screw in the top of this box later on. So what I will do is I'll make a sketch on this bottom face, and I'll center myself over it a little bit more, and I will draw corner rectangles stemming from each one of these corners. Again, it snaps things to the geometry for you, which is nice. So I'll start from this corner, and I'll make a few boxes. And then I'll make them, just for the sake of this demo, 5 by 5 millimeters. And here we go. When a given geometry turns black as opposed to the blue that we started with, that means that it's fully specified and I can't change it anymore. Since I specified this to start in this corner and be exactly 5 by 5, there is no other shape that this box can take, and that's why it turned black for each one of these. Generally, you do want to turn things black in order to fully specify them. Otherwise, it means that there is some range of freedom that you have. In other words, they can move in some direction and still satisfy your requirements, but you want to fully specify things generally. Okay, so we're done with this sketch, and once more, we're going to extrude. So we pick our extrusion tool and select each one of these boxes that we've drawn. And you can see again, by default, it goes 25 millimeters. We only want 19 so that it's flush with the top. Okay, so now we have these corners. Next, I want to drill a hole in each one of these so that we can screw something into them. And so then what I'm going to do is draw a sketch on this face, take a center point circle, and I want it to be centered on this segment. So again, I'll find the center point here. I'll find the center point here. I'll see where they meet, and I'll draw this circle. And let's say for this circle, I want to dimension it to be 3 millimeters diameter. And you can see it turned black, it's fully specified. And so I'm going to do that on each one of the corners. Okay, so we have our 4 circles. And once more, we're going to extrude. So I'll click on the extrusion tool, select each one. By default, it wants to add them. Of course, we want to subtract them. We're going to remove. And we're not going to go all the way through. We're just going to go 10 millimeters. It depends on the size of the screws you'll be using. And so it'll go only halfway into this box. So like this. Notice it goes in. It doesn't go all the way through. Next, I want to make some standoffs for my circuit board. So for this, I will again draw circles. And let's make them on this bottom face, a sketch, center point circles. And let's say they're going to be here and here. And so then let's say that they have an outer diameter of 5 millimeters. And let's also then make an inner diameter We'll see why we need to do this in a moment. And that's going to be 3 for our screw. So notice the circles are still blue because they're not fully specified. I can technically move them around and it'll still match all of my constraints. Now, of course, based on the actual circuit board that you're going to be designing, you're going to know exactly where it's going to go. You're going to know exactly where these standoffs are going to be relative to your board. And so we can throw in some dimensions. Right now it's kind of arbitrary, but based on your board, you'll know what these are. And we can throw in dimensions between various objects as well. So if I click on this center point and I click on this center point, it's going to give me the option of making a distance right between them or in various orientations based on how I move the mouse. So if I know that they have to be, let's say, 10 millimeters apart in this direction, I also know, for example, that they have to be 15 millimeters apart in this direction. Okay, so now we're making some better specifications. And I know that this circle, this standoff is actually going to be, let's say, 15 millimeters from that wall. And I know that it's also going to be 20 millimeters from this wall. That's it. Notice they turn black because they are now fully specified. And of course, this is going to be based on your actual project. So now I'm done with this sketch. And once more, I'm going to extrude these. And so I'll select just this outer part. And I'm going to go 5 millimeters up for the standoffs. But then I also want these holes to go all the way through because the screw will go all the way through. And then I will extrude once more. And it'll be just the inner part of these. And I want to remove it. And here, I'll just say 2 millimeters just to go all the way through. And you can see now that we have these holes that go all the way through. And so I can place my board on top of here and put screws that go all the way through. Now to make this a little bit nicer, I don't want my screws just going all the way through, but I want to actually have a nut on the other side, but I don't want the nut to stick out. I want it to be embedded. And so the nut is going to be, let's say, 2 millimeters high, but remember our wall down here is 1 millimeter. So I need to give it a little bit more clearance. And so let me show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to make another sketch on this plane. And I'm going to place another circle using the center point of this one, again a geometry snap right here. And I'm going to make some more circles right around these. I'll make each one of these be 10 millimeters. And I will extrude them up by, let's say, 2 millimeters. So now we have something that looks like this. And now what I'll do is I'll go underneath this. And I will make a sketch on this bottom plane. First, I'll make a concentric circle. I will make it have a diameter of 6. And now this is going to be based on the actual nuts that I'm going to be using. So again, recall that you have to base this on the actual things you'll be making. And so then I'm going to go up to this tool right here. So I actually want a circumscribed polygon, not an inscribed one, because I have this bounding circle. And I'll start in the middle, and I'll go out to the circle that I drew, and I'll click it. And now I can change the number of sides that this has, so I can make it any number of sides of this polygon. But since it's a nut, just 6 sides, I'll put it as this. And here we go. And same thing over here. So now I have these nut shapes, these hexagons, and then I'm going to extrude them, remove by just 2 millimeters because that's the size of it. And here we go. Now we have this offset for the nut, so that it'll be flush with the surface of this box once we put screws through our standoffs and our board. And this is pretty much it for our enclosure right here. There will be some finishing touches a little bit later on. One thing that I do want to mention though is variables. So I haven't used any yet, but they can be quite useful. Suppose that I want to change one aspect of this without changing each individual component that I've previously made. So for example, I change the size of the screw that I'm using, and it's no longer going to be 3 millimeters, but rather it's going to be, let's say, 2 millimeters. So what I could have done from the very beginning, from when I first started making these screws, or the screw holes, is I could have defined a variable. And by the way, what I just did right here is I can use this rollback bar to go back to any stage in the creation process and see what things were like there and insert things at those points. Be careful with this though, because if you insert something that destroys a future geometry, that's going to be a problem. But you can use this to inspect what you've done and to insert things as well. So I can click over here on this variable, and I'm going to define a variable. And let's say it's going to be screw diameter. And its value here that I'm going to assign is going to be 3. So now I have this variable, and now if I go back, so I'll roll this all the way to the end again, but I can still double click on any one of the things that I've done previously. So when I started drawing the screws in sketch number 4, and I can see that I defined each one as 3. What I could have done instead is defined it, and now to use the variable, I'm going to say pound sign, and then the name of the variable, screw diam, and if I hit enter, well, it goes back to 3 because that's what it is. But if I double click it, you can see that it is actually screw diameter. And so then what I would do is I would replace every location where I use this with screw diameter. And so I did it here, I hit the check mark, everything goes back to how it was. I know that I also did it later on in my next sketch when I define this as 3. So again, I'll redefine it as screw diameter, and this one as well. And now what I can do, and you can see the change, let's say I change the screw diameter just to make it stand out a little bit more from 3, I'll change it to 1. If I do that, notice every location where I used it before has now changed to a 1 diameter instead of the 3 that I had before. So you can quickly change things in your design based on what you're actually going to be using this variable. So it makes things a lot simpler to change later on, a lot more programmatic, instead of having to go back and changing each thing individually. Okay, so this is our project enclosure for now, and now we're going to make a cover for it. Right, this is the box, we need a cover. So we're again going to sketch on the top plane here, and we're going to make another box of the same dimensions as the first one. So we'll dimension it to be 40 by 50. And let's make it 2 millimeters thick. Okay, so here's our cover. Now we again want to make holes in the corners in order to be able to screw this into the top of the box that we have right here. And so we are again going to make some holes, a sketch on here, and circles. And let's also make each one of these be screw diameter. But of course now they have to be the same locations as the holes that we have on our original box. So we have to go back and check what that distance is, and we can do that pretty easily. So we'll go back to the sketch that created these right here. Now all I did was specify that it should be at the center of this and this segment, and that it should have a diameter of 3, but I can still check other dimensions. Even though it's fully specified, I can still check. So I can click on this center and on the side, and it'll show me that that's actually a distance of 3.5. If I click this, it's going to be gray because I can't change that. I can't change this without changing without contradicting one of my other geometries, but is there just for reference. So it's 3.5 from here, and I can see that it's also 3.5 from there. So that tells me all that I need to know. So I go back to here, to my latest sketch, and I'm going to make them the proper distances. Okay, so here I have them all in the proper locations, and I'm going to extrude them by removing, since I want them to be holes, by 3 millimeters to go all the way through, and here we are. Now, since this is going to be the cover, and again I want it to be nice looking, I'm going to make a counter bore for my screws that are going to go in here, and since I know the kind of head that they're going to have, I'm going to use the chamfer tool right here and click on the edge of this hole. And now the default here is 5 millimeters, and it turns red because it can't make 5 millimeters. It'll be way too big. I'm going to make it 1 millimeter, again based on the properties of the screws I'll be using, and it's going to look like this. So you can see that if I make this bigger, let's say I make it 2 millimeters, well, it becomes bigger and bigger. Now you can see why it can't be 5. It'll go beyond the edge of this. So again, I'm making it 1, and I want to do this to each one of these screws so that the screw fits nice and flush at the top of this cover. Now I also want this box to look nice instead of having these sharp corners, so I'm going to use this fillet tool right here. And what I'm going to do is then I'm going to select these corners. I don't want 5 millimeter, I want just 2 millimeters, just to give it this nice rounded look. And so I'm going to go through and select each one of my corners on here, and let's make it correspondingly on here so that it looks good. Okay, so now I have these rounded corners. And one more thing, just again, these are kind of aesthetics, not really necessary, but if you want to give it a nice look, let's also fillet these corners over here, also with 2 millimeters. You can see you can do outer and inner corners. And here we go. This is our entire project enclosure. Now, if you have other parts of your project, for example, like I said, you might have a power jack on the side, that's easy enough to add here. So I'll go back to sketch, sketch on here, and maybe throw in another box over here. Again, you'll make the dimensions properly. And once more, extrude that, remove it, and there you go. You've got a port for something here, and you can make all sorts of ports based on what your project actually entails. I would recommend making all ports and all other measurements before you start the process of chamfering and filleting like we did over here, because it'll make your dimensioning easier to the outside of the box instead of with these rounded corners. After you've created all of your components, it's always a good idea to test if they fit nicely together. To do that, you're going to go to the assembly right here. Now it's blank to begin with, so we're going to insert some parts, and we only have these 2 parts right now in Part Studio 1, so we'll insert both of them, hit check, and now we've got these parts. Now to see if they fit nicely together, now again, as I said before, there are always a lot of different options that you can choose with things to do here, but you're going to basically assign them a connector. And in this case, you want the connector to just be able to slide up and down. So the first thing I'll do is I'll right click on this part and I'll fix it in place so that it doesn't move anywhere. Now I can't move it. I can move this one around if I want, but this one is fixed. And I'll make what's called a slider mate. And the slider mate, I have to tell it where I want to mate these 2 parts. And you can see there's a lot of different options for where you can mate to. And a natural point that will make them align nicely, since my corners are round and there aren't very nice corners, is this hole right here. So I can actually make it made to the top of this hole. And so if I click this, now this is where this mating component is going to go, and I want to pick out the corresponding spot on this one. So on the part that'll join, and that will be right under here, also in the middle. And so I click that, and it disappears because it went over to this box, and you can see that now it fits. Now if you maybe made some mistakes, you can actually change that by specifying how you want this to actually fit on here and things like that. And that's pretty much it. So now you've got this box, and you can see that everything fits nicely. The reason you want to do this is just to check that the holes align, which it seems like they do, and that it makes sense in your design. You can actually drag this, and now it slides on this. But notice it can also go right through it, which doesn't make much sense, so you can actually impose some limits on this mate. You click on limits, and you actually specify that the maximum here should be 0. And now you can't move it down anymore, but you can still move it up. So now it has this limit, which it cannot pass when it's going down. And so this is what your project enclosure will look like when you actually print it. And the very last step here then, to actually print, you go back to your Part Studio, and you can right click on here, say Export, and it's going to give you these options. For most 3D printing, you'll want to use STL. And the format doesn't really matter here. Units, again, I have millimeters. Resolution, I always choose fine. Download, and I choose to export the parts as individual files because that's what I'll use to actually import them into my software. And then you hit OK, and it's going to give you the files as a download. So overall, we have seen the basics of design in Onshape. You can make much more complicated things, but this tutorial should give you the fundamentals to create custom enclosures or a good starting point to go beyond.